Imagine this. It's the summer of 1914, and Europe is on the edge of chaos. Nations have mobilized, alliances are made and broken, and the world is on the brink of the Great War. While the Western Front is becoming a bloody quagmire, on the Eastern Front, a battle is unfolding, one that, while often overshadowed by others, will forever alter the course of the war and the fate of millions. This is the story of the Battle of Tannenberg, fought between August 26th and 30th, 1914, a battle that could have been forgotten to history, but wasn't. The stage is set in East Prussia, a quiet rural region in what was then part of the German Empire. The forests were thick, the land vast, and the people lived in peace. But all of that was about to change. In the wake of Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia, Russia mobilized its vast army, not knowing that they were about to take on a more cunning and nimble enemy than they expected. Two massive Russian armies, one led by General Paul von Rennenkampf and the other by General Alexander Samsonov, surged across the border into East Prussia. Their goal, to crush Germany's defenses and march straight into the heart of Europe. But there was one thing the Russians didn't account for: the genius of a German officer who wasn't even supposed to be there. In the face of overwhelming numbers, Germany needed a miracle. Enter Paul von Hindenburg, an experienced, battle-hardened officer who had been brought out of retirement. Alongside him was his brilliant staff officer, Erich Ludendorff. Together, they would not only save East Prussia, but they would change the tide of the war forever. They didn't have the numbers the Russians did, but they had something far more valuable: strategy, foresight, and a deadly understanding of the terrain. Hindenburg and Ludendorff quickly realized that the Russians, spread across a vast area, were terribly disorganized and ill-coordinated. The two armies, separated by miles of wilderness, were completely out of touch with each other. They didn't know where the other was or what the other was doing. That's when the Germans struck. Imagine being one of those Russian soldiers, moving through dense forests, thinking you were on the attack. You march through the trees, hearing only the sounds of your boots on the earth, unaware that the German forces are closing in from all sides. It's a tense, eerie kind of quiet. But for the Germans, it's the calm before the storm. Hindenburg and Ludendorff launched a masterful series of attacks. Their forces, though smaller in number, moved swiftly and silently through the dense forests, cutting off Russian supply lines and surrounding Samsonov's army. It was a trap, and the Russians had no idea it was coming. For days, the two armies skirmished, but as the Germans tightened their grip, the Russian soldiers found themselves surrounded. Panic set in. There was no escape, no hope, and no way to communicate with the other Russian army to help them. On August 30th, after days of brutal fighting, the fate of the Russian army was sealed. In an unexpected stroke of brilliance, the Germans had encircled them completely. Over 92,000 Russian soldiers were captured, thousands more were dead, and Samsonov, the commander, would ultimately take his own life in shame, unable to bear the weight of the disaster he had led them into. The German victory at Tannenberg was nothing short of stunning. A numerically inferior army had not only defended their homeland, but struck a blow that would shake the Russian Empire to its core. But the battle didn't just change the fate of the men on the battlefield, it had far-reaching consequences. For Germany, it was a victory that catapulted Hindenburg and Ludendorff into national heroes. Their names would become synonymous with military brilliance and leadership. For Russia, It was a catastrophic loss. The Russian army, demoralized and broken, had suffered one of the worst defeats of the war. Their dreams of quickly conquering East Prussia were shattered. But this defeat would reverberate beyond the battlefield. The loss at Tannenberg sapped the Russian army's strength and morale, and the scars from that battle would ultimately contribute to the unrest that led to the Russian Revolution just a few years later. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of Tannenberg was what it meant for the people of East Prussia. The land, caught in the crossfire of two empires, would bear witness to the horrors of both world wars. The battle may have been forgotten by many, but for those who lived through it, the echoes of that conflict would never fade. The Battle of Tannenberg may not have been the most famous battle of World War I, but it was undoubtedly one of the most significant. A forgotten war in many ways, but one that shaped the fates of millions.